Bath in the UK, and I'm pleased to join you today in this session where we're going to hear about trends in teaching and learning. Before we begin, we appreciate your patience and your understanding as we're bringing this conference both in person and to virtual attendees, and we're working hard to make this a seamless experience for all. Please note this session is being transmitted via Zoom through Feedloop. The speakers will have their turn presenting, and at the end of all presentations, if we have enough time, we will begin the Q&A. If we don't, then we will move to doing that virtually, and that's one of the lovely things about a hybrid conference. We have options. Those viewing through Feedloop, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and the moderator will ask your questions on your behalf should we have time at the end of this session. So I'm going to introduce the presenters in speaking order, and they'll join us either on stage or virtually. And we're going to move the order around a little so that we welcome our colleagues who are joining us in person first, and then we'll move to the two virtual presentations. So I'd like to introduce Kelly Rowan. Rowan is the Digital Archives Librarian in the Digital Collections Center at the Florida International University in Miami, Florida. As the ETD librarian, she publishes all university theses and dissertations. She also manages various digital collections, working with community partners to develop and maintain collections in the digital repository. Currently, she's the project lead in developing a conscious metadata initiative for FIU libraries. And additionally, she offers several workshops every semester through the Digital Scholar Studio. Her research interests include the science of survey creation, data and research methods, copyright, the use of AI in libraries and ethics, and practical approaches to privacy. And you can find her publications and presentations through Digital Commons at FIU. She holds a master's degree in library and information science, religious studies, piano performance, and pedagogy. And Gonzalez is the Special Collections Librarian at the Special Collections and University Archives Department at FIU in Miami. She is responsible for arranging, describing, preserving, and facilitating access to the special collections through the creation of finding aids. Additionally, she works with donors in the assessment, property rights, and legal issues regarding donations to the library. She provides research assistance in topics related to Cuba, Latin America, the Caribbean, Florida, and Miami. And in addition, she teaches classes and workshops related to the use of special collections and the University Archives materials at FIU. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Library Science from the University of Havana, Cuba, and a Master of Arts in Library and Information Science from the University of South Florida. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started. I'm going to hang on to my phone because I'm rather chatty and I do not want to run over into Anya's time. Let's see our slides. We are great. All right, hanging on to that phone here. What is decolonial metadata? And one way to think about this is to think about it as removing the colonial language that marginalizes various ethnicities, genders, states of being, from what has historically been considered or, subconsciously or consciously considered as the default state of being, which has been to be white, to be able-bodied, right, to be Protestant, to be heterosexual male, and to have some means, economically speaking, and between the ages of 20 and 50 or so. And so we're trying to move away from that as the default, right? And it's not always, though, about removing this type of language. So when we're doing the work, the reparative work, to create inclusive metadata, it's about respect, it's about diversity, it's about giving people that are missing or their records are inaccurate, it's about giving them back some integrity. So sometimes it is about replacing a word, right? Just removing it and replacing it. So if we look at 450,000 illegal aliens work in the city of Miami, well, that term's been changed. We don't use that terminology anymore. So we might say, on my second line here, 450,000 non-citizens. Some states use unauthorized workers, but we might use that instead. Now, if it's a document, though, where the entire, like a long PDF that we're putting up in the repository, and throughout the entire document it says illegal aliens, then we might change the description to say something like 450,000 non-citizens, often referred to as illegal aliens before 2015, work in the city of San Diego or Miami. I see, forgot to change San Diego. Well. All right. Laudatory language is another area that we have to work on. So I'm using Thomas Edison, Lewis Latimer here as examples. So, if you're looking at records about Thomas Edison, you often see, or anybody of his stature, right? So you see laudatory language like this remarkable person, noteworthy, esteemed, prolific, innovative. And then when you read things about his Black counterpart who created the long-lasting filament, it'll just be Lewis Latimer created a filament, and he's not esteemed or noteworthy. And so it's very tempting as archivists to go back in and want to add remarkable, innovative, respected, whatever, to Lewis Latimer. But there's also the problem that as we're doing this work, we are always working in this liminal space between neutrality and partiality. Because we're human and we can't be neutral, right? So when I'm thinking that Lewis Latimer is also noteworthy, I am putting a value judgment on that, right? But I want to be partial. So generally, when we're looking at descriptions like this, what we aim for is instead of going to Lewis Latimer's entry or description and writing that he is also an esteemed, innovative innovator, it would be better to just remove that from Edison and let their research, as people research about them, let their innovation speak for themselves. Let the researchers add that. So at FIU, in the Digital Collection Center, we set out to begin this initiative of reparative metadata. So the first thing I did a scan of our digital collections. And this is the key. You really have to get to know your collections really, really well. We started by developing our own thesaurus. You can see here, it's just in an Excel spreadsheet, right? With a bunch of tabs at the bottom. The tabs are what you see on the left. So designations like ableist, ageist, history and society. History and society has terms in it like conquistador or riot. So terms that are not homophobic, they're not ableist, they're not racist terms on their own, but we need to go back and look at them because is that a riot or did the record just call it a riot because it was Black people protesting? And we need to change that to protest. Conquistador, that's not a racist term, but we need to look at that record, right? Because that does it also happen to mention the genocide? Or did that get left out because it was a white man, right? So that's what's under history and society. The rest, I think, are self-explanatory. So something else to look at. So as we're looking at the metadata, the one for Indian, and so I have the quantity, we have 523 records that use Indian. This is a really good description on the fixed column, right? Now, if we go up to Oriental, this is not sufficient because we're thinking about who's going to do this work, right? We're all busy. We have small departments. Who has time to go back and look at thousands and thousands of records and do this work? So at some point, it may be interns. So it may be student workers. And so under Oriental, it says replace with Asian or Asian American as appropriate. That's not good enough for an intern. So that's going to have to be fleshed out more. But we're just starting. It's still in a spreadsheet. Fine for now, we're getting there. So this is my favorite terrible example in our repository, right? This is why I say you have to know your collections very, very well. Because if you're just scanning through your collections, looking for those terms in the thesaurus, like homophobic terms or racist terms, it's not gonna bring you to this record, right? So the name of this record is Horse and Carriage. And the description says an unidentified man rides in a carriage drawn by a black horse in front of a large house. There's a whole other person in that picture, right? There's the coachman. I mean, the house got a mention before the coachman did. So the truth is, we may never be able to actually name these people if we don't know who they are, but we can at least say, an unidentified man rides in a carriage drawn by an unidentified coachman. But the problem for me is finding this record, right? I can't put in black man. He didn't even show up there. I can't put in black. There's nothing I can do to find him. I have to know my collection. So this is an example of erasure, and this makes it very hard to go through your collections when this is happening. This one, I am so pleased that 2 of these women at least got their names, their own names, and they aren't like Ida Barron isn't referred to as Mrs. Fred Barron. She got her own name. That's great, but there's only 2 of them. I don't know which 2 are each. And 2 women are unidentified, right? So this is an example of an incomplete record, also hard to find because none of those terms, unless you just search for a woman, which is how I found this one. But other than that, like none of the ableist, racist, any of those terms are going to bring up this record. So again, knowing your collection and just scrolling through it is very important. So I want to leave with a great example. So this is a really good example of a well-done record. So 2 Seminoles, and this is how you want to identify various indigenous groups is by their tribe first, if possible, if you know it. And they are named, right? We have Henry, Cowboy Billy, and Tony Tommy. So this is just an example of a good record. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of giving you an overview of how the project works at FIU, and then Anya, oh, there you are. Anya is going to dive into how one of our departments is actually implementing it. So what we did to get the project off the ground was, do a lot of webinars, research, find our resources, do a collection scan, develop a thesaurus, which we will eventually move into like a LibGuide where it's a little more accessible than just sharing a spreadsheet constantly. We also met with every department in the library independently. And I will tell you, this was very enlightening. We learned a lot. Different departments had very different concerns. Cataloging was really almost ahead of us. They've been dealing with this for quite a while. They were really on it. Our sound and image, very worried because they're dealing with a large Cuban collection, amazing music collection called the Diaz Ayala collection. They're dealing with a lot of diacritic marks, and some repositories don't like those. So they're, this is another form of respect, right? Of respecting individuals, being able to spell their name correctly. So every department brought up different concerns. And so I would say if you're going to take on a project like this, meet with each department. They may have very different issues and concerns. Everyone had the concern of like, who's going to go back through our collection? Who has that time, right? We can all fix it going forward. So we're working on that. What we have found that is working for us is working in creating small working groups. So because again, everyone's busy. So whoever is available has time at a certain time, we're working on a harmful language statement. Later, we'll have another small group that can work on a LibGuide, like migrate our thesaurus into that. And that kind of helps people can work on a project that's short for a brief amount of time rather than trying to make everybody work on something that nobody has time for, right? So my last slide before I hand it to Anya is just what we're doing right now, which is the harmful language statement. And these are the things that we felt we needed our harmful language statement to express, which is that, any views that include harmful language do not reflect the views of our librarians of our university. Explain to people the difference between historical content and what is descriptive content librarians have written. And then allow them a way to report any language they find that is inappropriate. I'm going to hand it over to Anya.
Thank you, Kelly. And as Kelly mentioned before, I'm the Special Collections Librarian, and this is what we did in our department. As you may know, finding aids are descriptions of collections. So when we describe a collection, we put our own bias, right? Because we are describing the collections. So what we can do to avoid all these problems. These are the challenges that we have at FIU. I don't think that FIU it's an isolated case. Everybody has problems with access barriers. It's a problem of the tools that you have, the funding, the description, the language, the subject knowledge, the ownership. Who owns your collection? We don't own the collection, right? We just have the collection. The collection is physically safe in our space, but we don't own the collections. It's the creator, it's the community who owns the collections. What are the solutions that special collections at FIU gave to all these problems? Increase access points, engage the community, bring your scholars, your faculty, people in the community, because these people are the ones that really knows the collections, how it should be described, which terms should be described. Post-colonial stewardship, administrative support, get the support from your administrators. Those are the ones who are gonna provide you with the funds to hire staff, provide better tools. Like right now, if I use changed 2 years ago from one tool to create finding aids to another one who is much better, create local controlled vocabulary. That's what we're doing with Kelly's, and Kelly's a leader in this part. And the repeated metadata, and don't be afraid to disrupt. This is the case of one of the collections that we have in the department, Julian Peláez del Pozo papers. I would like to say that our collection, one of the things that we collect, it's Cuban material, and that's one of the reasons this collection is there. So why this collection? First, it fits the department mission statements. So we collect Cuban, we collect genealogy. That's one of our case. Right now, we have special collections La Metadata librarian who is bilingual. She speaks Spanish and English, something that is gonna help me to describe the collection and add better terms. Increase the knowledge of all the projects that we're doing. We are so lucky that the donor for this collection, she's alive and she has been contributed to the collection. It's her family's papers, by the way. So we took all this into consideration and we said, okay, this is the right time to work on this collection. We have so many tools that we have to take advantage of this. So now that I know all this, I have been part of a workshop, different classes. Now that I know all this and my mind changed, what should I do? First, I cannot fail to see. Now, if I see a term, I need to change it. If I see something that is gonna be harmful, I need to change it because I know that it's affecting one of the communities. Accountability. The reason that we have these collections in my department is for historical value. So that is the part. I'm not accountable for that, but I'm accountable. I feel accountable for the descriptions that I provide now. This is not contradictory to archival practice. I engage my community, as I said before. I bring the scholars, professors at FIU, the community, etc. I train my students because they are the ones who help me. So every time I go to a workshop, if it's free or if they can sit next to me, I say, come in, we're gonna be learning together. If they cannot, well, I provide training for them later. Review and revise the procedures, the guidelines, the local vocabulary. That's what we're doing right now. Finally, share your information, everything that you have learned with your colleagues at your library. Other example that I have, it's the Abril Lamarck collection. Once again, this is another Cuban collection. I don't know if you can read it there. Yes. I'm gonna translate the word there. It's that is in a newspaper. Remember, we're talking about 1930s something. Back in the day, it was okay to call one person cripple. So this is what we decided to do. We cannot change that, as I said before. However, this is the note that we added. Transcription of handwritten notes or photograph in the collection and the English translation have been provided for contents. As I said before, these text may reflect biases and prejudices or terms that are outdated, offensive, or insensitive. This is the Julian Peláez del Pozo papers. This is what we were talking about before. And in this case, we thought that it was better to have the descriptions in Spanish and English, because we felt that if we were gonna just describe the collection in English, we were gonna be losing some content. Besides that, who's gonna come and see my collections? People who speak only English? No, people who speak Spanish. And if I provide just the collection, the description just in English, those people are gonna feel intimidated. Where I'm gonna go and see the collection if I don't even speak English? And Miami, it's a community. The community in Miami, most people are bilingual, but a lot of people just speak Spanish. So especially older people, that's why we said, you know what, we are gonna be doing this in both languages. So everything is described in the collection in English and in Spanish. And this is the Abril Lamarck. This is the piece of paper that I was telling you about that describe this specific photograph. And I don't know if you can see, I put a statement that it says 1922 updated focus on improving description of disabled people. No more cripple, disabled people. And we took those words from the ADA website, American Disability Act website. It's a very good resource. It lists all the terms that should be used for people with disabilities. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kelly and Ania, for this absolutely fascinating talk. That takes us now to the online, and I think the next person we have is Tatiana. Yep, lovely. Tatiana is going to join us virtually from Carnegie Mellon University in Qatar, and her work is titled Careers Library, Unconventional Collaboration to Boost Learning. Tatiana has 20 years international experience with university libraries in Belarus, Canada, and Qatar. She is currently holding the position of Associate Director of the Library at Georgetown University, Qatar, and her interests and expertise lie in the information and digital literacy, teaching and research support, staff development, and library leadership. Please join me in welcoming Tatiana. Right, well, moving swiftly on. Our third presentation, although our second presentation now, and we may go back to the third, I'm going to welcome Margaret Planck and Britta Beutnagel to our conference virtually. They're joining us virtually from Leibniz Information Center for Science and Technology in Germany, and their work is titled Digital Fluency for Open Educational Resources, the Active Role of Libraries in Establishing OER in Germany's Higher Education Sector. So Margaret's been head of the Competence Center for Non-Textual Materials at the German National Library of Science and Technology, Hanover, since 2012. Her focus is on the user-centered development of innovative infrastructures, tools, and services to make free educational materials, science and teaching videos, research data, and scientific software accessible, searchable, citable, and archivable. She coordinates the project OER portal Twilo, funded by the Lower Saxony Ministry for Science and Culture, and is responsible for the TIB AV portal and the TIB Conference Recording Service, amongst others. She holds an MA in Information and Media Studies from the University of Hildesheim, and she represents the TIB in several national and international bodies, including the Science and Technology Libraries section of IFLA, the International Council of Scientific and Technical Information, the Network for Media Libraries in Germany, the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, the EU Screen Foundation, and the Europeana, that's a really difficult word to say, Aggregator Forum. Britta has been a research assistant at TIB's Competence Center for Non-Textual Materials since November 2020. Her work focuses on the digitization of teaching and learning, as well as the didactic conception, implementation, and evaluation of digitally supported educational offerings using competence-orientated forms of teaching and learning. And in the Project OER portal, her work covers the development and publication of OER resources. Her area of responsibility includes competence development for open educational materials with the inclusion of technical systems, as well as the consultation and support of university lectures. Prior to her employment at TIB, she worked in research and teaching at Leibniz Universitat Hanover, the Institute for Vocational Education and Adult Education. Please join me in welcoming Margaret and Britta.
thank you very much for the introduction and a very warm welcome from my side to this short presentation about digital fluency for open educational resources, the active role of libraries in establishing OER in Germany's higher education sector. As said before, my name is Beutnagel, and since she can't be here today, I'm here on behalf of Margret Planck, the head of the TIB's labs for non-textual material. And of course, Margret is also the co-author of the paper that this presentation is based on. So just a few words to introduce our institution and our field of work. So as the German National Library, the TIB holds a wide collection of literature as well as audio-visual media and research data, especially but not exclusively in the field of natural science and technology. And as a university library, the TIB provides the literature supply for the Leibniz University of Hanover. But even more importantly, we are a competence center for digitization in science and technology. So we are active in research and development that focuses on data science and digital libraries, scientific data management, non-textual materials, open knowledge, open science, and visual analytics. We are providing a very wide range of different services to make information and knowledge more accessible, reusable, and also more transparent. And the TIB develops and operates digital infrastructures. And one of these infrastructures is the portal Twilio, which we are working on together with 5 partner institutions from the German education system. And Twilio is the central repository for open educational materials in the state of Lower Saxony. The platform addresses primarily university teaching staff, but also other university employees, such as employees of university didactics or of e-learning centers. On Twilio, users can download materials for their own teaching, and the platform also allows them to publish their own teaching and learning materials, thus sharing those materials with others. Besides the platform itself, we also offer consulting and education on all aspects of OER, but I think we will get to that later on. So let's take a look at the topics that we will cover in the next 15 or 20 minutes. So this presentation is divided into 3 different parts. To start with, I would like to give you a very brief introduction to open educational resources. I'm sure that many of you already come into contact with this topic, but I think it is important to take OER newbies into consideration in this presentation as well. So after that, we will take a look at the current status of establishing OER in universities in Germany. And here we will take a closer look at obstacles that inhibit the dissemination of OER in higher education in Germany. And thirdly, I have brought along a concept that we are currently implementing in order to bring key technical competencies for OER into Germany's universities. So without further ado, let's get started. In order to show you what OER means, I brought you the UNESCO definition. So open educational resources are teaching, learning, and research materials in any medium. They can be digital or analog. And key is that these materials reside in the public domain or that they have been released under an open license. And this license allows others to access the materials, to use them, to adapt them for their own teaching, and also to share the materials with only very few restrictions. So directly at first glance, you can see that the usage and the production of open educational resources bring a lot of advantages with them. From the perspective of university educators, they can be summarized as follows. So OER carry the guiding principle of an open access to education and knowledge, and there's no arguing about that, is an important principle for educational equity. And using open educational materials can help educators with their own courses, since OER can be used as building blocks and they can be adapted to fit the context of one's own teaching. Publishing OER can also help teaching staff to become more visible as educators, and in this way, OER can counteract the reputational asymmetry between research and teaching activities. And last but not least, since they can be developed further, OER encourage educators to work together, keeping materials up to date, and therefore they motivate educators to carry out a joint quality management. So in Germany, free access to education, information, and knowledge is a declared educational policy objective. So that is the state of play with us. The reason here is that Germany has a broad state-funded higher education system. And the idea is that materials that were created at state-funded universities should be available to the general public as well. And the development, the use, and also the distribution of OER has been and is currently focused in several government funding grants all over the country. In more and more third-party funded projects, the creation of OER is set as a criterion for funding as well. And also right now, there are state initiatives in 7 of our 16 federal states that aim at developing OER infrastructures. And one of these infrastructures is our platform Twilio. But despite of all these measures, and although that the idea behind OER is generally supported by higher education institutions, universities still remain hesitant when it comes to, let's say, fully committing to OER. So overall, the use and creation of OER has not yet arrived in the educational practice of German universities. And one reason for this is that clear signals from institutions for the use of OER are oftentimes missing. Just very few German universities have an OER policy, for example, that tells employees that they can and that they should release their educational materials as OER. And there are oftentimes no OER advisory services in universities to help employees when it comes to openly licensing their material or using openly licensed materials by other authors. So, okay, I have to admit, I might be painting things a little bit too gray here, but don't get me wrong, this is slowly changing. So more and more universities are recognizing the relevance of open educational consulting, but tasks that have to do with this are often attached to individual jobs that already exist in the university. So for example, a person who actually does e-learning support then does some training to be able to offer OER consultation as well. And this is fine as long as the demand doesn't get too high, but these responsibilities are quickly overlooked and often not even known to the same university's employees. And that is due to the very complex organizational structure that universities usually have in Germany. Another reason, and that is a very important one, why OER are not yet known and established everywhere in Germany is that dealing with OER requires sound knowledge about copyright and about licensing law, which is not yet common among university educators. And this knowledge and these skills for the use and creation of OER do not yet rank as key competencies or general knowledge. And especially for the technical design and provision of comprehensive OER, for example, courses or self-learning modules, skills and abilities for dealing with sometimes really complex digital systems are necessary. And while legal and didactic topics are focused on in a wide range of continuing education offerings from established institutions in Germany, the technical design of OER is often not taken into account. So there's a need for support measures, such as continuing education offerings that focus on exactly that, the technical side of OER. So What are we talking about here when we refer to technical solutions for OER? So for example, Markdown and technical applications based on it, and GitHub or GitLab are very useful when it comes to producing and publishing open educational resources. So again, I'm sure that most of you already know this, but in case you're not familiar with these two options, Markdown is a machine readable language that can be used to format texts and data. But unlike other markup languages, the Markdown syntax is very simple. So for this reason, it is really easy to learn the language, and no programming skills are needed. Markdown documents are still easy for humans to read and to understand, which is quite different with other markup languages. And the advantage is that after writing your document in Markdown, you are able to convert that same document into different formats, depending on which program or application you use afterwards. So to give you an example, let's say I have written something in Markdown. I can turn that same document into a presentation or into a text document or even into an online course. GitHub and GitLab are network-based services for version management, and usually these services are used for software development projects. However, they do not have to be used for this purpose alone. They are particularly suitable for OER because they are available to everyone free of charge, and they enable people to work together on content. Via GitHub or GitLab, content can be made openly accessible, thus be used by really everyone. The services also allow you to determine the final format of your content quite flexibly. So again, it is possible to format the content into a web page, for example, or even into an online course after you've written it. And it is important to talk about GitHub and GitLab and Markdown together. The answer to that is fairly easy because you can use Markdown documents in GitLab or GitHub. So here's an example. You can write a document in Markdown, then put it online via GitHub, and then use another open source program to generate an openly accessible online course from it. So to sum it up, technical tools or services like Markdown or Git allow authors to make their work publicly available, convert them into different formats, and also enable others to use them flexibly. And because they are so flexible in use, they have major advantages over common formats for content and documents, such as PDF or DOC. They overcome the restrictions of these formats because you can choose the end format after being done with your work. And they also don't have the problems that most learning management systems have. So content of classic learning management systems is not yet fully interoperable. You can't transfer a course structure from one learning management system into another learning management system yet. Of course, this is worked on, and developers are working on formats that can be transferred between and used in different learning management systems, but as of now, it is quite problematic. Another problem there is that learning management systems usually have, is that they don't allow public access. So long story short, Markdown and GitHub or GitLab allow authors to distribute their materials in a completely open manner, not only in a legal way, but also technically. And that is just the way OER should be distributed. And one more important info on that, of course, this is not new. So the use of Markdown and Git is not something really completely new. But in Germany, outside of technical fields, they are not really widespread. So competencies for using Git and Markdown are not key competencies for educators, especially in humanities or social sciences. And the one thing that is new about it, however, is the idea of interlocking the possibilities of GitHub and Markdown very closely with the production of open educational resources, and to train teaching staff on this topic. And I have to admit that this is where Germany differs from other German-speaking European countries. So Switzerland, for example, or Austria are already a step ahead here. So here we already have significantly more learning offerings that focus on GitHub or Markdown, for example. So let's take a look at the role that German libraries can play in all this. As infrastructure institutions, libraries are specialists when it comes to technical possibilities for dissemination of information. So supporting the development of digital fluency for the technical creation of OER is a field of action that libraries can play a key role in. For the provision of OER infrastructures, of course, on the one hand, but also when it comes to consulting and education for OER on the other hand. And I brought you a little example on how this can look. So at the TIB and in the Twilio team, we already offer a wide range of continuing education programs related to OER. We have many programs on legal and didactic topics and also include technical aspects. But due to the relevance of technical topics that I mentioned before, we now want to position ourselves even further in this area. And to do so, we are developing an educational program that we will soon implement. The main goal of this program is to support the development of digital literacy for the technical creation of OER. More precisely, we want to support competency development in the use of Markdown and Git explicitly to develop open educational resources. And the offer will be a comprehensive online course that is based on the principle of problem-based learning. And we are planning on integrating learning outcome tests. And we are also planning on awarding digital badges as proof of acquired competencies. And in doing so, the TIB will be the first library in Germany with a course area where participants can earn badges. The content of our further education program looks like this. Module 1 addresses key topics related to OER. So on the one hand, it focuses on OER basics like the definition, characteristics, opportunities and challenges. And on the other hand, it focuses on how to deal with the materials in a legally compliant manner. After completing the units of the module, participants have the opportunity to obtain their first batch. And for this purpose, a self-test consisting of multiple choice questions and assignment tasks has to be completed. And the test deals with 3 major topics. Firstly, copyright law and open licensing. Secondly, citation and integration of OER in one's own work. And thirdly, remix rules for open materials and open content. The second module is the main part of the program. So here the focus lies on technical topics of OER creation. It consists of 4 different units. Creating videos as open educational resources, using Markdown for open materials, using Git for open materials, and using LearScript for open materials. And just for your information, LearScript is an open source program that uses advanced Markdown to design publicly accessible classes and courses. And each of the 4 units is a self-contained lesson that covers every step from getting to know the work interface or the functions of the respective tool or software up to creating one's own content with it. And at the end of the module, participants will again have the opportunity to complete a self-test with multiple choice questions and a small practical part, like formatting something in Markdown. And this thematic focus is on open standards for videos, Markdown syntax, as well as functions of the service GitHub. And after successfully completing the self-test, participants receive their second batch called Technical OER Creator. The last module deals with steps for publishing OER. So evaluation and quality control, and of course, the steps you have to take to publish your material in an online platform, for example, in Twilio. We also added a lessons learned unit as a conclusion of the program in the end. So much for the offer. So to conclude this presentation, here's an overview of the next steps we need to take to implement the program. So first, we are about to do the detailed planning and the didactic design of the educational offering. Secondly, we need to finalize the technical infrastructure to store the content on. So we have to design the learning environment, the infrastructure, as well as the badges. And as soon as the program is finished, we will make it accessible via the German National Educational Platform, a nationwide educational platform that is currently being built. So that's it already from my side. I hope you enjoyed this little insight in our work. If you have any questions about our platform Twilio, the educational offer, or OER in general, please feel free to contact us anytime. We'd be glad to get into touch with you. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Britta. Thank you. Are we going to go to Tatiana now, or no, we're not? Okay. Well, that gives us a few moments for questions. Do we have any questions through Feedloop?
Hello, this question is for our colleagues at FIU from Plato Smith at the University of Florida. How will Florida House Bill 7 impact teaching and learning at FIU?
Can you refresh my memory on that House bill so that I can answer that question better?
It's the Individual Freedom Bill.
In relation to our presentation, the only impact that I am aware of is that a colleague also working on this has been told that for further funding for projects related to reparative metadata work, and if they're applying for anything like that, not to mention that that it is for that kind of work, because it would not be funded by the current legislature. I don't know if that answers your question. That's all the knowledge I have as far as that impact.
Do we have any more questions, either from the floor or from Feedloop? Nothing more on Feedloop? Anything else from the floor? Yeah? Lars.
I have a question or a comment on open educational resources. You said that there is a lack of support to open educational resources from the institutions, and it's a hesitant development because of worries about legal and technical parts of open educational resources. And you see big possibilities in the role of libraries. In my institution, we produce a lot of open educational resources and cooperate with teachers. And we think that earlier we had books. The idea was to support the staff with the necessary sources for knowledge, and now we have to produce it because it's there in the institution, and we are sharing institutions, and that's the discussion, because we have a digital skills center who say that we have to teach the staff to produce their own digital material, and they did a lot of work during the pandemic, and it was produced a lot, but it wasn't shared. The teachers keep it for themselves, and they produce it again and again and again for every course. And we tend to say, not only focus on the skills, you have to focus on the results. and on the sharing. And for some institutes, we have made complete digital courses and then combined with flipping the classroom. There is no more dropouts, no more failure by exams, and we have reduced the cost of preparing election with 50%. And of course, that is a possibility for the university to save money, but it's also a possibility to really use more resources for helping your students. Is that a discussion that you have been up to in Germany, focusing on the skills and focusing on the results? Because I think it's really not the technical skills that are the problem, it's the willingness to share with each other, which we will have to promote.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very exciting insight. Of course, we've got the same problem here. We have to make educators aware that sharing their materials is a good thing to go, and that it can help others, that it can help the scientific community, of course, and legal issues, for example, and helping people to produce materials that are legally compliant is a main focus, and the technical side is a very small niche of it. But since we think that it offers the opportunity to a new way of dealing with materials in general, to making them more flexible, that it would be a good thing to have these technical competencies as key competencies as well as educators. But of course, we are also focusing on helping people in the process of developing OER. And we are in Germany, there are a lot of further education offerings that do exactly that. And we are also trying to focus on the result, and the technical aspect is one small part of it. I hope this answers your question, but if you'd be interested in getting into touch, we would be really glad to talk to you about this further.
That's great. Thank you very much. And really nice to make these connections at such a distance as well. Do we have any more questions? Joan, hello.
Very similar in a way, but in the US, some of the large, highly successful OER programs are done through subsidies to faculty members. So it's a competition for who would like to receive a grant to develop some OER materials. And those often are given to faculty who will develop materials often in STEM disciplines that will have impact on very large enrollment courses. So they'll reach hundreds, if not thousands of students, especially in a state system like California, let's say. Do you have similar programs? And in the US, this is so important because students do pay for their own textbooks. And I don't know, in Germany and some of the other countries represented here, I think there's much more direct subsidy to students. I don't know if it includes things like their textbooks and learning materials. So I'd be very interested to hear about the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that interesting question. So we have the same flow here. So in general, only people who are promoted or who are funded to produce OER really do it. And oftentimes in these funding lines, OER are a byproduct. So they're not the key goal for this funding line. They are just one thing that has to be published after the project is finished. And one thing that is so concerning the student side, so Germany has a large state-funded higher education system. Of course, we've got private universities as well, but there's no such thing as a certain, let's say, quality management. So the quality management between the state universities or the private universities doesn't differ. So it doesn't matter for a student whether he or she has a degree of a private or a state university. So that is the state of play, so the starting point. So students usually don't have to pay tuitions, and by using open access materials and open access publications, the cost of books for studying, for example, are quite low. So usually you don't have to buy your own learning materials at state universities in Germany. And this is where the idea also comes into play that state-funded universities should also make their materials publicly accessible, free of cost.
Thank you, Britta. Thank you. Do we have any more questions? No? In which case, please join with me in thanking Kelly, Britta, and Anya for their presentations. And we'll be back at past for a keynote.